KPBS On Demand is supported by Splitero, helping homeowners pay off debt or for home improvements by offering streamlined access to your home's equity with no additional monthly payments or new debt. Splitero provides a lump sum payment in exchange for a share of your home's future value. Learn more at splitero.com.
Watch out, mister. Here comes the twister.
This is Rudy Ray Moore.
Yes, I'm the human tornado.
Get ready to meet Rudy Ray Moore.
I chain down thunder and handcuff lightning. I'm so damn strong, it's sometimes frightening. I grabbed the star traveling 1,000,000 miles a minute and slowed it down to the state speed limit.
Rudy Ray Moore may not be a household name, but all that may change with the release of Dolemite Is My Name, Eddie Murphy's passion project about the singer, stand-up comic, actor, and film producer Rudy Ray Moore. I'm Beth Accomando, and welcome to another episode of listener-supported KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about two legacies, that of Rudy Ray Moore and Eddie Murphy, that have become intertwined in the new film Dolemite Is My Name. To discuss Murphy's new film, as well as the original Dolemite film and Blaxploitation cinema in general, I'm turning to a trio of people that I've previously had on Cinema Junkie. First, I'll be speaking with David Walker, award-winning comic book writer, author, filmmaker, journalist, and educator. And then I'll talk with San Diego-based independent filmmakers Sans Dixon and Dante Moran. But before we start the discussion, I need to take a short break. But I'll go out with a montage of TV ads to bring you back in time to the 1970s and that short-lived film movement known as Blaxploitation cinema. When I come back, I'll start my interview with David Walker.
You've been corporatized, blackularized, and superflied. You've been macked, hammered, slaughtered, and shafted. And now we're going to turn you on to some brand new jive. You're going to be glorified, unified, and filled with pride when you see 5 on the black hand side.
Trouble is here. He wears $600 suit, drives a $10,000 car, and he carries 2 guns. One to stop trouble and one to make trouble. Black hell breaks loose. Are you ready for the Black Street Fighter? The Black Street Fighter. He's a fighter for hire, and he's paid to take on all comers. Today, he's going right to the top. He's taking on the system. Hey, all you jive hustlers, you stone foxes, you mean dudes. Watch out, 'cause Slaughter's back in town.
They call her coffee, 'cause if you jive her, she'll cream you.
Blood is red, voodoo is blue, sugar is sweet, revenge is sweeter.
The fear of the year is here. Dr. Black and Mr. Hyde, a monster he could not control, had taken over his very soul. A screaming demon rages inside, turning him into Mr. Hyde, an unstoppable black Superman. Super strong, supernatural, and super bad. Rated R, under 17, not admitted without parents. So bring your mama, she'll like it too.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Splitero, helping homeowners pay off debt or for home improvements by offering streamlined access to your home's equity with no additional monthly payments or new debt. Splitero provides a lump sum payment in exchange for a share of your home's future value. Learn more at splitero.com.
David, we have talked before about Blaxploitation cinema, which is something that I really love. And Eddie Murphy has just come out with a film about the making of Dolemite and about Rudy Ray Moore. So a lot of people may not be familiar with him. So give us a little background on who Rudy Ray Moore was.
Rudy was many things. He was a comedian, he was a singer, he was sort of a vaudeville jack of all trades, but hadn't really made waves in the entertainment world. And then in the early 70s, as a comedian, he adopted this persona of this character named Dolemite, which became a really big hit, sort of an underground big hit, but still a big hit nonetheless, and then parlayed that into a series of really popular comedy records, and then made some movies, like really low budget movies that became cult hits. And it's just kind of interesting because Rudy Ray Moore and Dolemite are sort of these cult figures, and it's just kind of interesting now that, like, a couple weeks from now, everybody's going to know who he is. And that's just such a weird thing, because for the last, several decades, it's like one of those secrets. I would always say there's two types of people in the world. There's the people who know who Rudy Ray Moore is, and then there's the people that have never heard of him. And all that's about to change. Now,
he started in music and stand-up comedy. Dolemite became a film in the 70s. And explain a little bit about how this film kind of fits into the broader Blaxploitation cinema, because it's not exactly typical of probably the stuff that most people are familiar with.
Yeah, it came along, the Blaxploitation era or movement or genre, or whatever you want to call it, was pretty short-lived. It was like only from about 1970 to 79, really. And by 77, it was really on the decline. And Dolemite came out in 75, so movie comes out towards the end of this craze that included movies like Shaft and Superfly and Foxy Brown. Everybody was sort of riding that bandwagon, trying to capitalize on it. It was a time when, movies that were marketed towards a predominantly black inner city audience, they were made dirt cheap, and they turned a really good profit for whoever distributed them, produced them and distributed them. And so, Dolemite comes along really after, the height of the popularity of these movies, which was, probably 72, 73, and then 74, things started to wind down. And I think on paper, it looked like it was a bad move, making a movie, especially financing it out of your own pocket, which is what Rudy did. But in some ways, it breathed new life very briefly into that time and that era, because I shouldn't say nobody had made movies like Dolemite. There were some really low-budget films that came along, and they were made by people who didn't really necessarily know what they were doing, which, if you watch the first Dolemite, it's clear that they don't know what they're doing. But there's a certain level, I guess, of heart and soul, which this new Eddie Murphy movie gets into, that elevated Rudy's movies above, say, something like, there's so many bad movies from that era, like Speeding Up Time, or The Guy from Harlem, or Baby Needs a New Pair of Shoes. All these movies that have really, there's a reason why that they've gone into obscurity, and very few people remember them. But Dolemite has had something special going for it.
And the other thing that was a little bit different, not just in terms of the budget, but a lot of the films that kind of have been remembered and get a lot of play are films like with Pam Grier or Fred Williamson. They tended to be either action or drama, but tended to be a little more rooted kind of in the real world. And Dolemite was this kind of, it didn't feel like, on a certain level, it kind of was hearkening back to like that kind of vaudeville shtick, and it was comedy, and it was very kind of broad comedy. So in that respect too, it seemed to not quite fit into what seems to be remembered best from that era.
Yeah, no, there's the Little Rascals, the Hour Gang shorts from the 30s. There's a bunch of ones where, like, Spanky and those guys, Alfalfa, would put on a play, like in the, wherever, the backyard or the basement or something like that. There's always this sort of thrown together slapdash production, and that's what those, the Rudy Ray Moore movies feel like. They feel like, he got a bunch of people together and was like, hey, let's go make a movie. And well, that's actually what he did. So there's sort of a similar vibe with the films of Ed Wood.
Yeah.
Although I think that the people that worked on Rudy's movies actually made better movies than Ed Wood did. And of course, the writers of this new film, Dolemite Is My Name, the same guys who wrote the Ed Wood movie that Tim Burton directed. So there's some similarities there. It's but yeah, Rudy's movies are definitely, they're set in their own unique sort of universe, which is, I guess for lack of a better term, is the Dolemite universe.
Well, you mentioned Ed Wood, and there is this sense of that kind of a burning need to make a movie not really having the money or necessarily the knowledge to do it, but somehow just getting through it. But at least with Rudy Ray Moore, in the end, he was far more financially successful than Ed Wood ever seemed to have been.
Yeah, no, Rudy, I mean, it's funny because if you watch Dolemite, it's such a crude movie in terms of craft and skill, and it sort of is a miracle that it did well. But then if you watch the next two movies that came after that he did, The Human Tornado and P.D. Wheatstraw, The Devil's Son-in-Law, those are much better films. They're technically more well-crafted. There's a better sense of cinematic craft and style. And so he got it. Clearly he started to get it right, at least briefly, as opposed to Ed Wood never seemed to get it right. And so it's just sort of interesting because in the Eddie Murphy movie, there's some moments in which they actually recreate scenes from the second movie, from Human Tornado, and sort of play it off as it's being from Dolemite. But it's really clear, like, they scored a touchdown, they won with the first movie, and they were like, okay, let's learn from our mistakes, which was really pretty cool.
Eddie Murphy had been wanting to make this film for a while, and one of the things that I think makes it work well, which is the same thing that I think worked for the Tim Burton Ed Wood film, is he comes to it from what seems to be a place of affection and of like really wanting to pay tribute to this guy that he feels may not be remembered in the best way possible. Yeah, you never get the sense that he thinks that Rudy is someone that you should be making fun of, or there's never a sense of malice or anything like that, or even mocking. Mm-hmm. There's this great sense of respect and reverence for the person and the work, and that really comes through. And it's just interesting to me because, I was fortunate enough I met Rudy like 20-something years ago, nearly 25 years ago, and had the opportunity to work with him a little bit, hang out with him, get to know him. And, he was a very different person than the Dolemite persona. Mm-hmm. And, one of the things that we would talk about was, even though he was doing comedy and he was a comedian, he always wanted to be taken seriously within the context of what he was doing. And I think that a lot of times people don't necessarily take him or the movie seriously, and some of it wasn't all his fault. When the movies were released on home video back in the 80s, the company that released them never released them in the proper aspect ratio, so they were never cropped properly, and so the boom mic is in all these shots, right? And it really makes the movie, especially Dolemite, the first one, look even more amateurish than it really was, mm-hmm. because in reality, you wouldn't have seen the boom mic nearly as much if they had released it in the proper aspect ratio. And I remember talking to Rudy about that. Like, it was like there was people that didn't take him seriously in the 70s, and then in the 80s and 90s during the home video revolution, when people were rediscovering his work, they were rediscovering it in some ways in the wrong context. And what did you think of the Eddie Murphy film overall? We talked a little bit about how that affection comes through, but how did he capture what Rudy Ray Moore was like? I mean, is it accurate in any way? Because, it's a very entertaining film, and I'm not sure how much of it is fact-based or how much of it is, kind of spinning.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really entertaining movie. And I feel like Eddie Murphy is playing a character more than he's playing Rudy Ray Moore, but that was sort of my takeaway from it, but he's still playing him as a very compelling character. I have trouble with these sort of biographical films that try, in which the actors really try to embody the person so much as just embody the character of what that person represents to either to them or to the public at large. I don't want to see something that's necessarily so accurate that I might as well just be watching a documentary, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And so Eddie Murphy, I feel like, is doing his idea of what Rudy was so much more so than he's actually playing Rudy. And there's some people who have some problems with it. I've talked to a couple of people who've seen the movie, and they're like, Eddie sounds just like, a character from another movie, like, Buddy Love or something like that. And I'm like, There's nothing wrong with that. Let Eddie play who he wants to play, Rudy the way he wants to play him, which is great. I mean, I think it's one of probably the three best performances Eddie Murphy's ever given in his career. And then if you really are interested, go back and watch Rudy's movies, especially Human Tornado, which I think is the best of all his movies.
Yes, I'm the human tornado. Spinning, grinning, and sinning. I used an earthquake to mix my milkshake. I eat an avalanche when I want ice cream. I punched a hurricane and made it a breeze. I swallowed an iceberg and didn't freeze. The human tornado. Flinging cash and talking trash. Dreamy, delayed, relayed, mislaid, and parlayed. Jumped, thumped, bumped, and mugwumped. The human tornado. Rated R. Under 17 not admitted without a parent or a note from your jailer.
Also, a number of the Blaxploitation films were made through Hollywood studios, and a number of them had white directors. But Rudy's films were really something that he created, and so there was, a black filmmaker behind them, which is different from some of the more studio-based films.
Yeah, and even how the first movie got distributed, him going out and four-walling it, renting the theater and showing it, also harkens back to another era of film, of black independent film that a lot of people don't talk about. And Rudy and his movies are never placed within a historical context of the black films from the really going back to the 20s, but especially the 30s and 40s, whether it was a Oscar Micheaux film or a Spencer Williams or, eventually white directors started making some of these movies too. And Rudy's movies really belong in that category, maybe even more so than the 70s Blaxploitation movies, because it's clear he was influenced by them, and they even follow some of the same story beats as, there's movies like Juke Joint and Boy, What a Girl, and all these movies are usually pretty basic. They have a very basic plot, and then there's an excuse for a musical number, a couple musical numbers, a couple dance numbers, and some comedy routines. And if you watch, like, Rudy's movies, they have all of that, right? They don't have, big budgets or anything like that, but it's like, oh, there's the comedy routine. Oh, there's the dance number. Oh, there's the music number. And very few film critics or historians have ever talked about it in that context. But, I remember hanging out with Rudy at a film festival in the early 2000s, and we got into this really deep conversation about filmmakers like Spencer Williams and Oscar Micheaux and the independent world of film that they came up in the 30s and 40s, distribution when theaters were still segregated, when the entertainment world, when there was still the Chitlin circuit, and all that stuff influenced Rudy, and him and I talked about that at length, and I wish more people could understand, like, the larger historical context of where Rudy fits in.
And also, is there any kind of pushback to his films, just in the sense that, well, just Blaxploitation cinema in general, sometimes I feel like when you want to screen them, you get a little pushback at times saying, like, well, these are dated, or they don't necessarily always represent the African-American experience as some people might want to present it. And I don't know if with his films being more comedic, is there also some pushback in even within the African-American community about them not really representing in a way that they want to, like, remember or bring back or showcase?
Well, there's always pushback, right? There's always people that, can find the negative and stuff. And, those movies, they're raunchy, and they're, definitely there's a level of sexism and misogyny in them that, and they're politically incorrect. There's so much stuff that you can't escape it. At the same time, it's like we have to, I'm a strong believer that we have to learn how to contextualize what it is we're watching, what it is we're talking about, and not get caught up in totally examining it from a contemporary standpoint. Yeah, we examine it from a contemporary standpoint, but we also have to look at it from, okay, well, this is what was going on in 1975. This is how it fits in, and then go from there and recognize that, okay, if these are the things that you're not into, if you're not into, say, raunchy sex humor, then don't watch the movie. That's the thing. I've had so many people, oh, I thought it was terrible and I was offended by it. And it's like, well, there's you could always turn it off. You don't have to watch it. I mean, I'm the sort of person, if I don't like what I'm watching, I stop watching it. If I find it offensive, I walk away from it before it gets to the point that I'm, so horribly offended I'm not going to be able to sleep at night.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it just seems like there's so much to appreciate about him being this, kind of self-made man, and the way that he pursued this and was able to become successful on the real fringes of the film industry.
Oh, yeah. No, I agree. I agree 100%.
And, you mentioned how this kind of, to put it in a context, how it references back to some of the early Black cinema. In terms of where we are now, is Tyler Perry sort of in that same ground, in the sense of, he came to film having built an audience, this kind of community-based audience, and he's making films that he wants to make outside the Hollywood system. And it seems like, he's tapped into something very particular and successful for him, but not necessarily of mainstream Hollywood.
Yeah, it's funny that you should say that, because you want to talk about something that I think would offend or drive some people crazy is if you were to compare Tyler Perry to Rudy Ray Moore. But there's more comparisons there than most people are probably comfortable with. And to take it one step further, if you look, Tyler Perry, I've never been a big fan of his work, but I've always had respect for the business side of things, how he handles things, right? Rudy was never able to make it in the mainstream film world. There was a handful of movies that he appeared in and made those attempts. It never quite worked out. And, Tyler Perry, he made that one Alex Cross movie, and it was just like, oh no, go back to what you're doing, go back to Medea, like he's found the formula that works for him. He's never found really, I can't think of anything in which Tyler Perry's found like the super success in mainstream film, but he doesn't need it. He's successful in his own terms. I think in a different time, and different place, maybe Rudy could have done, found that level of success. Maybe not. Maybe it was just the natural progression. But, Tyler Perry, people don't talk about Tyler Perry and Oscar Micheaux in the same sentence that often, just like they don't talk about Rudy Ray Moore and Oscar Micheaux in the same sentence. But yet they should be, because they're all a long line of the same tradition, and you wouldn't have had one without the other, without the other, without the other. And to me, it's like it's a no-brainer to see it, especially if you look at Tyler Perry's earliest productions, even before when he was just doing the plays and videotaping those plays and selling those before he really hit it big and started filming stuff. He found his audience, and his audience was big enough and was willing to spend enough money to support him, and he never overspent. And that's sort of what Rudy did. He made his records first, and then used that money that he made from the records and leveraged it and borrowed money to make Dolemite. And, just when it seemed like it wasn't going to work out, the film found its audience.
Well, there's a scene in the Dolemite film, the Eddie Murphy, Dolemite Is My Name, where he's trying to pitch the film, and I believe it was one of the white producers says something like, well, you're making this movie for 5 blocks of people, and, that's not how you're going to make money. And then Rudy responds by saying, yeah, but there are those 5 blocks of people in every single city. And it seems like he and Tyler Perry have found, like, those segments of the population that will support them and understand that that is an audience. And even if you kind of look at it as small, it's like if you multiply it by every city, it comes out to be fairly big.
And not only is it an audience, right? This is what's really crucial. And I love that moment in the movie. That was like one of the moments where I stood up and I was ready to stand up and just start cheering, right? It was this acknowledgement that, what Rudy or what the character is saying in the movie and what Tyler Perry has figured out is like, not only is it an audience, but it's an audience with needs. It's people who there's things that they want to see. There's things that they're entertained by. Let's give that to them. And to me, that was like such a telling moment, and it was so heartfelt to me. And because it was the dismissive way, the Hollywood guy is like, it's just for 5 blocks of people. It's like, yeah, but those 5 blocks matter. And if you've got those 5 blocks and say, even if it's just, 40 of the 50 states, that's enough to make some money.
And also, even if it's a smaller audience or whatever size it is, it's an audience that merits attention and should be getting films that address their interests and needs and desires.
Something that entertains them, that's it, exactly.
So how do you think the Eddie Murphy film is going to do? Do you think it's going to find an audience today?
Oh, I do. I think so. I mean, Netflix in and of itself is such a crazy model, and they're doing I know they're doing a limited theatrical for it, which I think is pretty smart, because I wouldn't be surprised if somebody in that production gets nominated, and I wouldn't be surprised if Eddie gets nominated for some awards, whether it's a Golden Globe or an Oscar, and I think it'll be interesting to see people then watch some of Rudy's movies and really, really sort of discover them for the first time and see them for what they are. But I went into it with like a lot of apprehension. I was like, oh man, if this movie sucks, I'm just going to be so disappointed, because this is a project the sort of project that I'd wanted to do for a very long time. I always thought that Rudy's story would make a really good, interesting behind-the-scenes sort of thing. And there's a couple other movies from that era that I think would make really good, behind-the-scenes movies. Mario Von Peebles made one about his dad making Sweetback's Badass song. But I like Dolemite Is My Name more than I like Badass, which I thought was, a decent little film. So I think people are going to love it. I think that if amongst other things, people really love Eddie Murphy. It's been a long time since Eddie's done a movie that audiences could really get behind and really, remember why we liked him. And here's a cat who's been around for over 40 years. And this is like, watching this is like, oh, yeah, this is why I fell in love with Eddie Murphy. It's like, to me, it's all of Eddie Murphy. It's Eddie Murphy from Saturday Night Live that we first fell in love with. It's that strong charisma he had really early in his career with like 48 Hours and Trading Places. And then it's him when he was really hitting his stride in the early 90s with movies like Boomerang. But this is the sort of, I guess, the maturation of Eddie, right? We've seen him. If we're all old enough, most of us are, the hardcore fans are old enough to remember when he was like 18 years old, 19 years old on Saturday Night Live. Now he's, in his mid to late 50s, and he's really come into his own as a performer. And I'd love to see him follow up and do some more interesting stuff like this.
Well, you talked about Rudy Ray Moore in the context of film, but he also seems to have influenced comedians like Eddie Murphy, and also you have Snoop Dogg in the film, and kind of paying tribute to Rudy Ray being acknowledged as kind of this godfather of rap. So it seems like he influenced, or that his kind of influence has spread out beyond just film.
It's the world of hip hop, it's the world of film, it's the world of comedy. I would say the 3 comedians that get most talked about in terms of black comedians are, Richard Pryor, Bill Cosby, and Red Fox. Richard Pryor and Red Fox being the blue comedians who did the, profanity and sex jokes, and then Bill Cosby being the, being remembered for that wholesome comedy, which is kind of crazy now, given everything that we know about him, right? But, there's comedians who are sort of lost in time that people don't talk about as much as they should.
Yeah.
Dick Gregory being one, Godfrey Cambridge being one, and then Rudy Ray Moore being one. Comedians and people who study comedy and study pop culture will know who some of these people are, but the mainstream public doesn't. And I'm just excited at the possibility, the prospect of people, rediscovering Rudy and then also being offended by him, because that's the thing. Like, some of his stuff is truly, genuinely offensive to me, it's funnier. Some of his jokes are funnier just because how much they offend people. And I'm one of those people who loves to watch people get offended.
And you mentioned that Eddie Murphy may get some accolades and nominations for this, but one other person who stands out in this film that was so enjoyable was Wesley Snipes.
Oh, wasn't he great? You know, he's because he plays D'Urville Martin, who directed Dolemite, and I've sort of been obsessed with D'Urville Martin because he was a character actor going back to the 60s. He was in, Rosemary's Baby and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and then he becomes a supporting character actor during the Blaxploitation era, directed some stuff, but he died really young. D'Urville Martin died in his early 40s, I think in 1984 or something like that, and there's not a lot known about him, and I don't know how accurate Wesley Snipes' portrayal is, but it is so memorable because he plays D'Urville as a sort of, drinks a little bit too much, doesn't really care about what he's doing, and from everything I've heard, this is what, on the set of Dolemite, he was not a nice person. And he comes across in some ways almost as the villain of the film, which I think is really interesting, but so hilarious because, and Wesley isn't known for doing comedy, but he does
it was
it so well.
Good. And there's also this air about the character of, I was in Roman Polanski's Rosemary's Baby. I am so much above all of, what's going on in this madness on the set. I think a lot of the humor came from that.
Yeah, and meanwhile, he played he was like the elevator operator in Rosemary's Baby. It's
But that's a whole other class compared to this.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed that. I think that's going to be an interesting... I know that, on a personal level, I know Wesley Snipes has been through a lot of stuff the last, 10, 15 years. But it's interesting to see him make, I guess for lack of a better term, I hate to say a comeback. I hate to say that for both Eddie or Wesley Snipes. But I feel like in some ways these films are an opportunity for audiences to rediscover both of these actors in a way that's for older folks like myself, it's oh, yep, this is why I like these guys. And then for younger audiences, it's been 20 years since Blade came out. There's people out there who don't really get who Wesley Snipes is or why he meant a lot to audiences. It's been even, almost 30 years since New Jack City. And even going back to Eddie, it's there's some people who only know Eddie Murphy as the voice of Donkey from the Shrek movies. And those have been a while. So I think it's going to be, I think this whole movie there's a lot of opportunities for discovery, not just discovery of the subject matter, but also discovery of the talent involved in making it.
Take one, marker.
Action. Hold it, Dolemite.
What do you want?
FBI.
What do you want, man? Where's your warrant at?
This badge is my warrant. Open up the trunk.
It ain't mine. I don't know how I got in there.
You're going to jail for a long time.
You gonna have to take me!
Cut! Cut! Is there any angle that you could shoot this where it looks like he's actually kicking him?
There's no such angle.
I went to the screening for this with a couple of filmmakers, and one of the things that we all really enjoyed was the actual on-the-set stuff. That behind-the-scenes look was so much fun because there's so much about overcoming those obstacles of not having money, not having, everybody who may be the most skilled, but having that just burning passion to get something done, and it really captured that.
No, I thought it was so amazing, and it captured it in I guess, for lack of a better term, a respectful way. Because again, they could have really played it up like these guys were, completely inept and sort of losers, right? But they don't. Nobody comes across as lovable losers. They come across as people who just really want to do this, don't quite know how to do it, but they get through it. And the fact that Rudy made as many movies as he did, that he's sadly he passed away in 2008, so he's been gone for over a decade, but those movies are nearly 50 years old. The fact that we're still that we're talking about them again. We're talking about those movies, that people are going to rediscover them and really start having interesting conversations about that era and that time and what the larger blaxploitation era and genre meant says a lot. Because I honestly don't think there's anybody, with the exception of maybe Pam Grier, there's very few people who, on a personal level, were as interesting as Rudy was. I'll probably get in a lot of trouble for saying this, but I've met a ton of those folks. I've known a lot of the actors and a bunch of the filmmakers, and Rudy's story is pretty amazing.
Well, I want to thank you very much for talking about Rudy Ray Moore and the new film about him. But I also want to give you a chance to talk about your own work, because you do an amazing amount of stuff. And if people are in San Diego, they often see you at Comic-Con here. But what do you have coming up right now?
Oh, what do I have coming up right now? Well, let's see. I'm co-writing. There's two different series that I've been co-writing. One is over at Image Comics. I've been co-writing Bitter Root with Chuck Brown. Sanford Green is the artist on that. We're getting ready to launch into Volume 2 early next year. We're working on it right now. And that's a comic about a family of monster hunters. It's set during the Harlem Renaissance. And then over at DC, I'm co-writing a book with my friend Brian Bendis, and that's a book called Naomi. And that just wrapped up. We're getting ready to do the sequel to that. Jamal Campbell is the artist, and Jamal is finishing up a Green Lantern book. And then we jump back into Naomi. And then I've been dabbling in self-publishing again, which is where I came from. So I just put out a supernatural wrestling comic about wrestlers and werewolves and family dysfunction, and that's called One Fall. And that's I put that out with the artist Brett Weldley. And so I'm just keeping really busy. There's like 3 major projects that'll be announced any day now, and Bitter Root just got optioned by Legendary. So Legendary is making the film of Bitter Root, and Ryan Coogler is set to produce it. We haven't found a director yet, but everybody's working on the screenplay and looking at a 2021 or 2022 release for the Bitter Root movie. So that's super exciting, and and just keeping busy. Trying not to fall into the trap of being too idle.
I don't think I've ever seen you idle.
It happens. It happens from time to time.
All right. Well, I want to thank you very much. It's always a pleasure speaking to you and talking about blaxploitation films. I still want to run a film series with you, so one day.
That would be awesome. I'd love to do that. And you know what? I think now there might be some actual interest. I do think that that Dolemite Is My Name is going to. I'm hoping it sparks some new interest in that era, and in a appreciative way, not in a mocking sort of way. That's what's crucial for me.
Well, I feel like we're in a time frame right now where people are almost looking so hard to find things to be offended by that they want to kind of like tuck things away that don't fit their comfort zone. And I feel like we're losing some things that if you present them in the right context and understand where they come from, like they can be appreciated on their own merits. But I feel like it's hard to show some things because of that.
No, it's difficult. I've hosted screenings. I've been hosting screenings now for over 20 years, but now we have to get up, myself or someone I'm working with will have to get up in front of the audience before a movie and go, okay, so here are the things there's going to be some things that might trigger you, and because inevitably you're going to get an angry email or phone call or someone's going to protest you. It's like, well, we're screening Russ Meyer movies here, so you should know that, that these movies are technically sexploitation movies. So if this is something that offends you, leave now. And it's interesting to me how much people want. You're right. It's like they want to be offended. They want to find a reason to be righteously indignant. And it's like, okay, I think there's other things to be righteously indignant about. And if you become indignant about something that you willingly went to go see, especially a film, it's like, then it's kind of like shame on you, Don't ruin my good time.
Well, it's also, I feel like there's two parts of that. It's like I understand people who may object to a film and they have the right to criticize it and to point out what's wrong with it and discuss it. But there's that spectrum where that criticism starts trending towards censoring and making it unavailable and taking away the ability to see those films. And that's like where I find it difficult.
That's where I got to draw the line. I'm with you 100%. Yeah, I just watched Billy Wilder's The Apartment, which is, one of my favorite movies of all time. I rewatched it for the first time in probably 2 or 3 years. Definitely the first time I've watched it since the whole Me Too movement has started. And wow, talk about seeing things from a very different perspective. But it's still an amazing movie, and it still deserves to be seen. And it's still, one of Billy Wilder's best. And Shirley MacLaine is amazing, and everybody in it is amazing. And there's a different understanding of the movie in a contemporary context. But that doesn't change the fact that it's a great movie, and we should never dismiss it or try to put it into a box because it doesn't fit with all of our contemporary sensibilities. It's like, okay, well, let's examine how we've grown as a society. Let's examine how we've grown cinematically since then. But some people aren't interested in that. They're just interested in not being offended and shoving their views down your throat.
Well, and also, if you forget where we come from, if you don't appreciate what the past was like, then it's more difficult to kind of figure out where we are now or why things are the way they are if we've kind of just tucked all that stuff away.
Exactly. No, I agree 100%.
Well, as always, it's so much fun to talk with you, and I hope we can get you down here in San Diego to do some screenings.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be really cool.
That was David Walker. I need to take one more short break, and then I'll be back with filmmakers Sans Dixon and Dante Moran to talk about Eddie Murphy in Dolemite Is My Name and the original Rudy Ray Moore.
Damn, look like my women is on time. Dolemite is my name, and fucking up motherfuckers is my game.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Splatero, helping homeowners pay off debt by offering streamlined access to your home's equity with no additional monthly payments or new debt. Splatero provides a lump sum of payment in exchange for a share of your home's future value. Pre-qualification is available at splatero.com.
Yes, I'm Dolemite. I'm the one that killed Monday and whooped Tuesday and put Wednesday in the hospital. Called up Thursday to tell Friday not to bury Saturday on Sunday. I'm the one that had the elephants roosting in trees and all the ants wearing BBD. From the first to the last, I give them the blast so fast that their life is past before their ass has even hit the grass. See me, uptown, downtown, crowned and renowned. Delayed, relayed, mislaid, and parlayed. Hatch, match, snatch, and scratch. Whack, jack, smack, crack, boot black, blackjack, racetrack, and flapjack, and still coming back. If you crave satisfaction, this is the place to find that action.
That was the original 1975 trailer for Rudy Ray Moore's Dolemite. So I have in studio here with me Sans Dixon and Dante Moran, who are both San Diego filmmakers. And you guys have seen this original Dolemite film. Eddie Murphy has a film right now called Dolemite Is My Name that's about Rudy Ray Moore making that film. But what do you remember of the original Dolemite film?
Actually, I was very young when I saw it. The thing that I remember the most was the fight at the end with was it Willie Green? And when they finally had their big fight, I was not expecting him to rip out his spleen or was it his intestines? and then the I forgot, was he a cop? His friend, when he comes in, he's like, "Damn, Dolemite," and then he shoots him. I don't know. For some reason, I remember watching that thinking that's wrong, but it's great. So that's my memory of that film.
And Dante?
The one thing I definitely remember from Dolemite was the crazy fashion. and then you would start to see people emulate that fashion around because I didn't see Dolemite until like the 80s. I wasn't allowed to watch anything like that, when it first came out. And so, but he had a big influence on the way people talked, the way people dressed. And I think a lot of people thought, his ideas of him incorporating female martial artists, gunplay, BS talking, brothers who were running stuff. He was the pinnacle of that. A lot of films started to follow his format, and I'm sure he was, by the movie that we saw, starring Eddie Murphy, he was downplayed. A lot of his ideas were downplayed. A lot of people thought the film was trash. You saw the reviews, and they were never given any good reviews. It was all about the audience review. And so that's one of the things I always look for these days when I'm looking at, Google or Amazon, or not Amazon, but IMDb, Rotten Tomatoes. I look at the audience reviews first because, these films are made for the audience. And that's what he was doing. He was making a film for his audience, and I commend him on that.
So Dolemite is considered part of the Blaxploitation movement that was in the 70s. However, the films from that period that tend to survive more are more of kind of the dramas and the action films, stuff like Pam Grier and Coffee and Foxy Brown, or films starring Jim Brown. And those are the ones that tend to get remembered better. Dolemite is kind of an oddity within the Blaxploitation genre because it was action, but it was also comedy, and it was kind of way over the top. So how does this film kind of fit into that genre, and kind of how do you think it's being remembered?
Well, I think one of the things that helped it, it's still being remembered now, and why someone like, say, Eddie Murphy would have an affinity for it is its do-it-yourself approach, the independent spirit, because he put that together himself. Many of those films that, are big in the exploitation genre, those are studio films. And, they have studio directors, studio production and whatnot. And he just winged it, And I think you're going to get knocked for that because it's not as polished as the other films that come out. And there are no real stars. I don't think there were any stars except for, Derville Martin, who played Willie Green. And he was in some other films. But other than that, he was the only star in the film. So...
He was the elevator guy?
Yeah.
Rosemary's Baby. Not to cut you off, but I think as far as where it's funny because when you mentioned doing this, I looked up Blaxploitation Blaxploitation films because when you say Blaxploitation films, I think, like you said, Coffee, Bucktown, Cotton Comes to Harlem, it was a Sweetbacks, badass song. Did you know Coolie High is considered a Blaxploitation film?
Well, it also depends who's making the list.
That's true, too. That's true, too.
But yeah.
But I saw it on several.
Yeah.
And that's, for me, I guess, when you ask how does it fit in, I guess it's just another take on the Black experience. Because I guess ultimately what Blaxploitation films was kind of the overcoming the man, the white man, or just the system or whatever. I mean, depending on where it's set, in the South, it was more, the man is a racist, whereas up north, it was more the man in the system. But I feel like with Dolemite, it was just a Black experience, but it wasn't as polished. It was very much a B film. But I feel like just dedication, love, and ambition got that film to where it was. So,
well, based on the Eddie Murphy film, you get a little of that Ed Wood vibe in the sense it's somebody who really wanted to get into the film industry and to make a film. And despite the fact that he had a lot of financial hardships and didn't really have the support of the studio system, he was just bound and determined to get something made.
I think the difference between him and Ed Wood, and I don't know that much about Ed Wood, I'm realizing, but I feel like Ed Wood thought of himself as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
And I feel like with Rudy Ray Moore, he wanted to be famous.
Yes.
And this is going off of what I saw in the movie. Mm-hmm. And I think how it worked for him was he wanted to be famous via this film. So, I mean, talking about the Eddie Murphy film, he was willing to rely on others to get him there. He wasn't a control freak. Mm-hmm. And, talking about the film that Eddie Murphy did, that's the thing that jumped out to me was just the production process, because me and Dante, we both done films, and how important it is to keep just doing a short, just doing like a 2 to 3 day shoot on a short, you can lose your crew. So doing a feature where there's not a great script, there's not a great talent, and it just in his situation, you had a director who was checked out, which is massive. Yet he still kept everyone like motivated, and they wanted to see this done. That's huge.
We want this thing to be raw. Tell it like it is on the streets.
Yeah, lots of pimps and whores and cussing. And kung fu and karate. Brothers love all that kung fu and karate.
Do you know karate?
No, but I'm a fast learner. I can learn how to chop me a mother. Here, here, here. You know what we should have? An all-girl kung fu army.
There's plenty of story opportunity, Rudy. Across this nation, inner cities are being plagued by violent crime. I feel the government hasn't stepped up.
That's it. It's Whitey's fault. The mayor's corrupt, and there's an exorcism.
God damn it, an exorcism?
Yeah, all that whole mother in hell.
I don't know how that fits into our urban motif.
Rudy Ray Moore, he was, I would think, you can think of him in terms of being the original Robert Rodriguez. Robert Rodriguez was my influence and inspiration into being a filmmaker. I saw El Mariachi, and then when I read his book, I'm just like, this is what I want to do. Because, I've always been into films, but you're always being told this is what you have to do, and it's always going to be financially, impossible for you to get there. Where this guy is saying, no, you don't need to do any of that stuff. All you need to do is go out, make the film that you want to make, and somebody will find it. And when you hear words like that, it causes you to go out and it's like, you know what, I'm going to find myself. Whether I win or lose, I at least going to get out of the house and make the attempt. And like you were saying, being too stupid to quit. I was very naive, in filmmaking, and that's why I jumped into it, both feet. And then once I'm in there, there's no getting out. But plus, I'm obsessed with it. So this is something that I want to do until the day I pass. And I'm never going to quit.
Black exploitation films came up in the 70s. This is kind of the time when Hollywood was discovering that there was a black audience out there and they could actually make money by tailoring films for that audience, by either having the lead actors be African American or maybe the director like Gordon Parks. But a lot of those films were popular because like Pam Grier had this sense of kind of female empowerment to a degree, or you got to see Fred Williamson kind of stick it to the man. Is Dolemite a little more problematic because of the fact that he's depicting characters who might be pimps or prostitutes or dealing with kind of a different realm of experience that kind of looking back on or even at the time was not as fully embraced by some people?
Well, I think he was probably given maybe a little bit more slack, if you will, because it was a comedy. Mm-hmm. You can get away with a lot of stuff if you do parodies. And nobody took him seriously. And I think a lot of people thought he was going to fail initially. And so it's just like, hey, we're not even going to bother with this guy. And then all of a sudden he becomes successful. And he had to four-wall it. And then after that, it's pretty much like today. Hollywood will find you if you do the work on YouTube. So if you have 1 million followers, you have so many views on your videos and whatnot, you can get a meeting. Whereas you are a very talented artist, you can make a movie in your sleep. However, you don't have the followers, you don't have the high ratings on the content. It's very hard to get looked at. And so he basically had to do that. By four-walling, he brought Hollywood to him.
And in case people don't know, four-walling means he had to rent the theaters and pay for his film to be shown and gamble on the fact that an audience would come to him and allow him to make a profit on that. And that's a little more risky than if a studio distributes your film.
Yeah, it's funny you with your question, because I was reading an article a few weeks ago about I forgot who put it out, but there was a report that was done maybe 4 years ago, and it was on black spending. I can't remember if it was worldwide or just in the United States, but basically it summarized that businesses, by ignoring the black community, are leaving like $1 trillion every year on the table. And surprise, surprise, after that report came out, you see more black films, you see more of a focus on black audiences and just multiculturalism. Going back to Blaxploitation films, I think that's where they were at the time, where it was, there's money in this and it's cheap. So we can spend, would you say, $100,000 and make $2 million? I'd take those odds any day.
I'm just curious about that film in particular in the context of Blaxploitation. Is it a film that it was popular then? It definitely found an audience then, but is it more problematic for people to kind of screen it now?
So what I was going to say is I feel with that, it was a cheap film. It was successful. And then kind of like what we're seeing today, you could make a franchise out of it. And those are cheap and those are successful as well. I think that's one of those things where, and I feel like every group kind of has that, where it's like we can joke about this, but you can't. And I feel like Dolemite falls into that. So I'm sure when it came out, black audiences loved it. It's kind of like what in the Eddie Murphy movie where the I think it was the producer told him, I can only sell this, or the people that would buy this, there's only like 5 blocks of them. Mm-hmm. And he said, yeah, but there's five blocks worth of these people in every city. And that's all it takes. You know, he wasn't, again, he wanted to be famous, but I don't know, maybe he was just a bit delusional and it worked out for him. But I feel like he, in being a singer and being a comedian, you feed off the crowd. And I feel like doing live performances, you're more aware of what works than doing a movie. Mm-hmm. So, and he got through that movie pretty quickly. So I feel like it was very much of the time and it worked, but times have changed. So now nowadays I can see both sides. I can see that it's offensive. Why are we showing this? Let's ban it and hide it forever. But you can still look at it and laugh, especially just as a film in general. I mean, you've seen, was it Black Dynamite made fun of all the boom, you know? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you watch that movie, you see the boom so much. And if you've ever worked on a set, like that's the the DP loses his mind anytime the boom comes into the frame. So it's just, I feel like it's something that, if you're talking about the subject matter, yeah, it's stereotypical. Yeah, it's violent as hell. It's very sexist. But I feel like you have to remember that it's of its time. So I'm going to say no, it's not problematic.
Dante, do you want to chime in on that?
Do I find Dolemite being problematic? Absolutely not. I mean, if you listen to the radio alone, man, I mean, you have people driving around with their little 8-year-olds playing all kinds of very, very, interesting music. And so, Dolemite, that compared to what we have today, that's nothing. It is vulgar. Yeah, I mean, it's very vulgar. And so, but that's his audience. Like Sans was saying, by him doing the tours, being a singer, being a stand-up comedian, he knew what the audience wanted, what they, I guess you could say, needed, as far as breaking away from the typical studio dynamics. I know one thing: a lot of people who enjoyed the Blaxploitation genre, like say they were in their 20s or whatnot during that era, they loved it because it was different. It showed a different black audience. I love Sidney Poitier, but I also, love Fred Williamson, and it gives you something different because, like we had talked about before, those movies stirred up a lot of mess. within like the neighborhood. If you're a person, 1 year you're dressed like Sidney Poitier, but then all of a sudden these movies coming out, now the shirts are open, people got the chest hair showing, the pants are tight and whatnot, and it's like the hair's out, and people's walk, their swagger. After Shaft came out, everybody was walking differently, You got black dudes wearing leather coats in summertime in Michigan, so there's an influence right there. And so you have the people who are in power, let's say the preachers, the churches and whatnot. They are starting to lose their grip on the youth because of these movies, because of the music. It was very interesting, a very interesting time. And so, and Dolemite was one of those people, whereas you could get his albums on 8-track, and people would be driving through the neighborhood. They'd be playing his music. You had the Cool Modis. I mean, this is a little bit later, but, all these people are influenced by Rudy Ray Moore's stand-up, by his movies.
And it's funny, something you said that totally caught my attention is, when you're young, you always want what's, anti, what's subversive, whatever. And that's the other thing, because what you like, it's funny growing up and getting older, because just looking at my friends, you remember the 90s, the early 90s, we were assholes. And we like, Nirvana, Tupac, whereas now it's kind of like, oh man, this rap music is so bad. I don't think that rap music nowadays is worse than it was back then, and I don't think what was bad in the 90s was worse than what he was doing. And the reason I say that is, it's one thing when you're just putting on a show, trying to be edgy or whatever, but there was a lot of truth in what he was doing. He was building a character, but there was a lot of truth in that, a lot of pain in it. It was kind of a, if you're gonna hold me down, I'm gonna go out swinging, sort of thing. Like it was very rebellious, his character, and I feel like that is more offensive, which especially nowadays for some reason, than if it's just kind of constructed just to make money. I don't know if that makes any sense. Typically, it's just kind of like. Typically, the truth will offend people way more than a lie. Oh, yeah. If that makes more sense.
Now, Eddie Murphy had been working on a project about Rudy Ray Moore for quite some time. That film is finally out, and we got to see it. So it's in part a biography of him in his later life, right before he makes Dolemite, and his kind of obsession with bringing this to the screen and the challenges he faces. So what did you think of the film? Did you enjoy it?
I liked it. I liked it a lot. I thought, I've always liked Eddie, and I like to see him in more dramatic roles, where he can, show more of his acting skills. I mean, granted, you have like the Nutty Professor and like Coming to America, where he's playing multiple characters and whatnot, but you saw many levels of emotion just coming out of this one character, and the ups and downs. And us as filmmakers, we totally understand that. You can get really beat down in this industry, especially if you have a love or an obsession for what you're doing for a script. And Eddie Murphy, he's been around for what, nearly 30 years, over 30 years?
Almost 40 years.
Yeah, almost 40 years. And yet he's still having problems bringing this to the screen. So imagine if you're, someone, this is your first film, and you're trying to convince a bunch of people to, do this project for free or for, next to nothing. It's very difficult. Like you were saying, on a short, you can lose your crew within a day. So I liked it. I liked the passion that was put into it. You can definitely tell that Eddie had a respect for Rudy. And that's the one thing I like. Nothing is worse than hearing an actor saying that he's never seen the source material on the new role that he's about to adventure on, and it's like, what is this? So you can tell that Eddie did his research, did his homework, and had a lot of respect for Rudy. So, yeah, I enjoyed it.
And Sands?
I loved it. And I think Dante nailed what I loved about it. I'm a sucker for any film that shows film production, especially in a way that I relate to. Also, I'm a sucker for the, I guess, eternally optimistic character, even though I love dark movies. Well, and again, it's because, and Dante, you're going to hate me, but the Rodriguez approach to filmmaking, I'm not a fan of, and I've never been a fan of it because I feel... because the thing I love about filmmaking is that it's a team effort, and I don't care how good of a director you are or actor or whatever, you need everyone else. You need that AD, you need that DP, you need the gaffer to know how, it's a team effort. And I actually thought it was actually the thing that really sold me on Rudy Ray Moore, or his portrayal of Rudy Ray Moore, was Wesley Snipes' character. I forgot the actor he was portraying, but I think we've all been on film sets, and you know what it's like to see a director lose a set, and it's very, if you're on like a 10-hour shoot and everyone's checked out within the first hour, it's painful. Everything moves slow. You see it in the end. It's just bad. So for him to rally everyone constantly through the end of a feature that had no budget, that was very inspirational for me. Again, it's because I've been there before. I know what it's like to see that both at the top and at the bottom. I don't know. Because it's just so easy to just throw in the towel. And going in, he basically wagered his future, right? It was his rights for all of his, because he was a success, and he wagered future royalties, right, to get this movie done. And it's funny because I remember when I first started going into film, the first thing you always hear is, don't use your own money. Whereas nowadays, it's kind of like, why not? And I've always felt that way. And I like that he felt that way. And typically when you look through the history of Hollywood, all of these movies that, come out of nowhere, it's typically the director betting on themselves. So, yeah, I'm a sucker for stories like that.
Now, you brought up Wesley Snipes, so let's have a moment to praise him.
Oscar-nominated actor.
And, by the way, he was playing Dervell Martin.
Dervell Martin, yes.
So,
oh, my God.
Just so people have a context for this. So, in the film, he plays this actor that Rudy Ray Moore wants to get in his film, but knows that because his film doesn't have much weight to it, he offers him the chance to direct it, even though the guy probably had no real talent for that in particular. And so he's on the set every day looking a little high maybe, and not quite invested in the project in quite the same way that Rudy is. But it was a great performance, so entertaining.
It's so good to see Wesley back.
Yes.
And if you've ever worked on a film like that, because I feel like he so nailed the actor that was above it all.
Yeah.
Have you ever worked on a shoot where an actor is directing? It's interesting. But just the fact that he was so above it all, but when you actually see what he's doing, it's not that great. And I don't know, again, because I've seen it firsthand, watching him do it was just amazing.
And Dante, you brought up the fact that Eddie Murphy had this affection for Rudy Ray Moore. And one of the things they do at the end of the film is, after you've seen Eddie Murphy's version of Dolemite, we get some actual footage from the Dolemite film.
Coming to this theater as this next attraction is the picture that will put you in traction. Dolemite, starring me, Rudy Ray Moore, as Dolemite, and that bad Dervell Martin as Willie Green. Dolemite, Dolemite.
And it was pretty amazing how accurately he captured all that.
I enjoyed it. I don't know what the budget was, but it looked like, they put some time, some money into it. And again, My Name is Dolemite is a polished version of the the exploitation genre. I would think that would be something, Larry Cohen's name would come up at the end of that. if that movie, Eddie Murphy's movie, was made back in the 70s because of the production and whatnot. But again, rough and ready, I'll take it. You know, if you have the independent spirit, if I hear a story like, yeah, I mortgaged my house like the Soska sisters did to get American Mary made, I will see your film just to see, you know, hey, what did you do? You know, what obsessed you so much that you put your future, you know, on the line. I think that says a lot about a person, and it's unfortunate that I think that filmmaking spirit has really gone away.
You're talking about the filmmaking spirit. I don't know if it's, because we were talking about this earlier. I don't know if it's dead. I do think there's something to it being easier, and that, again, going back to the Dolemite film, shooting on film makes you really, you have to have everything set.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can't shoot a scene and then just do playback with film.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that. So, and it's a totally different way of lighting. Whereas with digital, it's a little too easy. And that's just, I don't know. I don't want to say that we've lost that indie spirit. I just think that it's a little too easy. And it's like anything, like you hear people complain about sports and music. Anything that gets big becomes easier over time. And the barrier to entry is no longer skill, it's just saturation. And I think that's where we are now. There are still great films being made. There's just so many bad films being made. You have to wade through them. And that's what works against you, because a lot of filmmakers still believe that the way to get discovered is, you know, just making something, putting it online, or going to a film festival. Mm-hmm. Well, you put it in a film festival, the film festival makes money. Maybe you'll get discovered, but maybe not. Because there was a big write-up on films, like all the hits from Sundance. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're all losing money. So it's, and I guess maybe this is outside of the indie spirit, but maybe not so much, where if you're making a film and you want to be a filmmaker, you have to think, well, this film get me to the next film. And I feel like where we are right now, it's just, okay, I've got this camera that, you know, autofocus and, you know, minimal lighting, and I got a hot actress or a hot actor lead, whatever. Maybe they have some juice behind them, and I just put it out. But who's the audience, you know? And I don't know. I feel like with Dolemite, I feel like he worked all that out. Like he already knew it was already mapped out. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that makes the process so much easier if that's how you approach it.
That makes the process of making the film much easier, but then you have to go to the distribution, and that's where he ran into a lot of problems. I totally agree with you. We definitely have an oversaturated market, and even with autofocus, minimal lighting cameras and stuff like that, there's still a lot of crap coming out because nobody learns how to use the camera.
And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but it's funny you know, you're talking about distribution and saturation, because he actually ran into that then too.
Yeah,
remember he was saying there's too many Blaxploitation films coming out, so it's like, what is it about your film that would make us want to put it out? And it wasn't until he four-walled it and it made money. And I mean, again, we've heard this story a million times.
Well, also he didn't follow the formula. You know, by that time there had already been a formula. You know, you have to have this, you have that. I mean, you have Pam Grier in your film. Yeah, come on in. We got you. Or have anybody that even looks like Pam Grier. And basically he was using people that he knew, you know, the neighbors and whatnot. People that I'm sure Hollywood would think would be a band of misfits.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you know, Hollywood didn't understand that this is pretty much a good depiction of America. You know, a better depiction than, you know, you don't see Pam Griers walking around everywhere.
Now, with Eddie Murphy, who's got a lot of, he has a lot of fame and he has a lot of followers. So when someone like him decides to make a film looking back on someone like Rudy Ray Moore, you know, we have a younger generation that seems to not know anything that was made before their date of birth. How do you think this is going to play out? Do you think it will make people more aware of just his films, or maybe make them even think of going back and looking at some of these other films, or at least placing these films kind of into a context to let us know why we are where we at now?
I think like the people who grew up with Rudy Ray or like the black exploitation era are definitely going to check it out. You know, if you're an Eddie Murphy fan, you're going to check it out. If you like black films, you should definitely check it out. But I think there are going to be a lot of white people who watch this film, because there were a lot of white people who love the exploitation genre. There were a lot of white people that want to tell other white people to go F themselves, you know, just like, you know, Dolemite would do it, just like Fred Williamson would do it. Like you were saying, it was in the North. It was about the system. And a lot of people who felt, you know, downtrodden, you know, foot on the neck, responded to the film, you know, regardless of, you know, the color or social standing of the people on screen. You know, they felt the representation in their words. And so I think there could be a resurgence. I definitely think you're going to hear some of the sound bites on some of the songs coming out. You're going to see a lot of that.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go. I feel like if, and actually, full disclosure, I was like that when I was young. I didn't know anything beyond the 70s when I was younger. It wasn't until college that I really expanded, you know, my my knowledge. But I feel like with My Name is Dolemite, that's why I like the scene at the end where he's talking to the kid. And I think even when the movie ends, there was text on the screen about how he influenced rap. Because he told, I mean, that was a big duh. But I feel like if there's a connection with younger people today, that'll probably be it. They may check him out just to hear what he says, like Dante said, so they can put it on an album or in a YouTube video or something. Because one thing I'm realizing is with film, a lot of the great films, they're not like new films. They're not necessarily great. They've just ripped off stuff that not a lot of people have seen. So, so you go deep and you can probably get a nice soundbite.
All right. Well, I want to thank you both very much for talking about the original Dolemite and Eddie Murphy's version of that.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
That was Dante Moran, along with Sans Dixon, talking about Rudy Ray Moore and Eddie Murphy. Thanks for listening to another episode of Cinema Junkie Podcast. I hope this show will inspire you to seek out some of Rudy Ray Moore's films to appreciate his place in both Blaxploitation cinema and in film history in a broader sense. And also to look for Eddie Murphy paying tribute to Moore in the new film Dolemite Is My Name. It starts streaming on Netflix on October 25th and will also have a limited theatrical run. So till our next film fix, I'm Beth Accomando, your resident cinema junkie. Cinema Junkie comes out every other week. Till our next film fix, I'm Beth Accomando, your resident cinema junkie.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Splatero, helping homeowners pay off debt by offering streamlined access to your home's equity with no additional monthly payments or new debt. Splatero provides a lump sum of payment in exchange for a share of your home's future value. Pre-qualification is available at splatero.com.